All right, so today we're diving into a really ancient and incredibly dramatic text, the Book of Joel. It's a short but super powerful story about a society that gets pushed right to the absolute brink by a catastrophe. And it's all about the profound choice they face when they get there. You've got a story of total ruin and the possibility of total restoration.
The whole thing kicks off with this really jarring question aimed at everyone. It immediately sets the stage. Something is happening that is so far off the charts, it's beyond anyone's living memory. This isn't just a bad season, okay? This is the kind of event that people are going to be talking about for generations to come.
So, the first act of this story, it's a scene of utter and complete disaster. The text just systematically breaks down the collapse of this society, and it starts at the most foundational level you can imagine, their food supply.
It begins right here, with the absolute basics. The grain, the wheat and barley that people live on, it's gone. The fields are wasted. And let's be clear, this is way more than an economic problem. This is an existential threat.
Next, the wine is gone. And this was more than just a drink back then. It symbolized joy, celebration, all the good times. So with the new wine dried up, it's like the source of the entire community's happiness has just been severed at the root.
And finally, the oil. They used it for everything. Food, light, medicine, it was essential. So, with the grain, the wine, and the oil all gone, the picture is pretty clear. It's a complete agricultural system failure. The land has literally nothing left to give.
And just in case we didn't get the point, the text just hammers it home. It's not one or two things failing, it's a systematic list of death. Vine, fig, pomegranate, palm, apple, everything is withered. And then comes the devastating conclusion, which isn't just about the plants, it's about the people. Surely joy has withered away. The devastation outside has created a desert on the inside.
So what on earth could cause this kind of total destruction? Well, the book reveals the culprit, but it describes it in this truly terrifying and unexpected way. This isn't some random act of nature. It's portrayed as an invasion. Get this, the invaders are a massive swarm of locusts. But listen to how they're described. They look like war horses, they sound like an army of chariots, and they have the teeth of a lion. This is not your typical pest problem. The language here paints a picture of a monstrous, conquering army that leaves nothing but a scorched earth behind it.
And this army is completely unstoppable. It moves with this terrifying discipline, almost like elite soldiers. They don't break ranks. They scale walls. They swarm the city. And then, and this is the truly chilling part, they get into people's homes, pouring through the windows like a thief. There's no defense. There's nowhere to hide.
And this is where the whole story just zooms out dramatically. Because the locust plague, as awful as it is presented as just the preview. It's a warning of something even bigger on the horizon. The text calls it the Day of the Lord, a coming moment of ultimate judgment. The locusts, you could say, are just the advance guard. But just as the story hits its absolute bleakest point, it pivots. Destruction, it turns out, is not the only option. A different path is offered, and this is a big but, it requires a radical, all-in response from the entire community. This is the story's big turning point. And here it is, the crucial demand. The command isn't just to put on a show of being sad, like tearing your clothes. The text demands something way deeper, rend your heart. It's a call for a genuine, internal, gut-level transformation, a sincere U-turn.
So how do you show that kind of inner change? Through something called a sacred assembly. Basically, imagine the entire society just hitting the pause button. Everybody stops everything they're doing to come together, face the crisis head-on, and collectively seek a new direction. It's a national moment of reckoning. And the urgency here is just off the charts. Who has to attend? Literally everyone. The leaders, the kids, even nursing babies. And in this really striking detail, it says the bride and groom have to leave their wedding. Think about that. No excuse is good enough, nobody gets a pass. The crisis is total, so the response has to be too. So in response to this collective change of heart, the book lays out this absolutely breathtaking promise. It's not just that the disaster will end. No, it's a promise of a complete reversal, a promise to restore every single thing that was lost. And this reversal is stunningly direct. It's like a perfect before and after shot. Every single piece of devastation we saw earlier is specifically named and then completely undone. The wilderness becomes green pastures. The dead trees bear fruit again. The empty storehouses are now overflowing with that very same wheat, wine, and oil that had vanished. It's a complete 180.
This right here is maybe the most powerful promise in the entire text. The restoration isn't just about replacing the lost crops. It's about restoring the years, the time, the labor, the hope that those locusts devoured. Just think about the weight of that statement, a promise to actually make up for lost time.
And the restoration goes even deeper than the physical world. The text promises a future where God's Spirit is poured out on everyone, sons and daughters, old and young, men and women. The ultimate hope isn't just for a restored land, but for a restored and renewed humanity.
And that brings us to the final act. The story that started with a local locust plague now zooms all the way out to a cosmic scale, showing us that final day of the Lord that was foreshadowed from the start.
And the arrival of this day is marked by signs that shake the very fabric of the cosmos. The sun going dark, the moon turning to blood. This is intense, apocalyptic language designed to convey an event of ultimate, terrifying significance. In this final act, all the nations are gathered into a single symbolic place called the Valley of Jehoshaphat, which basically means the Lord has judged. It's described as this place of final accounting, where justice is finally served on a global scale. The text repeats the word multitudes over and over, trying to capture the almost unimaginable scale of this moment. But it's not just a place of judgment, it's also called the Valley of Decision. This is the finish line, where the sum of all previous choices leads to a final, binding outcome.
You know, in the end, the book of Joel isn't just an ancient story about locusts. It's this timeless pattern. A devastating crisis forces a moment of truth, a valley of decision, that leads to one of only two outcomes: total destruction or profound restoration. And that leaves us with a question that really echoes through time. When we face our own crises, what are the valleys of decision that lie before us, both for ourselves and for all of us together?